Welcome to this explainer, where we're going to unravel a seriously fascinating medical and historical mystery. Today we're looking at a substance that looks totally innocent, tastes incredibly sweet, but actually holds a profound, ancient secret. We're talking about the infamous honey known as deli ball.
So, what happens when honey fights back? It's kind of a biological paradox, really. We usually think of honey as this pure, ancient, healing food, right? But what if I told you that this specific honey acts as a highly unpredictable neurotoxic weapon? People have literally been eating it, both on purpose and entirely by accident, for at least 2,400 years. Usually they're seeking a buzz, but instead they're encountering a literal poison hidden right inside the honeycomb.
Okay, let's dive into this.
To really understand how honey can become a weapon, we first have to look at its botanical origins. How does poison get into the honey in the first place? Well, honey is only ever as safe as the flowers the bees visit. Deli ball is Turkish for mad honey, and it's typically a darker, reddish, and slightly bitter honey. And the key thing to grasp here, the bees themselves are completely unaffected by it. They just go about their business foraging on the nectar of specific rhododendron flowers, primarily rhododendron ponticum and rhododendron luteum, which grows super densely around the Black Sea coast. But that nectar carries diterpene plant toxins straight into the honeycomb. These dangerous little molecules are what we call grayanotoxins.
Now, let's zoom in a bit and look at how this stuff actually jams up your nervous system.
Let's see how this plays out at the cellular level. There's this persistent myth out there branding mad honey as a classic hallucinogenic psychedelic like LSD or psilocybin, but we need to systematically dismantle that myth right now. Its true nature? It's fundamentally a cardiotoxin. Here's the precise pharmacological cascade of how grayanotoxin attacks your system. Unlike classic psychedelics, this toxin doesn't target your serotonin receptors. Instead, in step 1, grayanotoxins bind to voltage-gated sodium channels. These are the fundamental biological machines that let your nerves and muscles actually fire. But here's the catch. They only bind when the channel is already open. In step 2, once they're bound, they block the channel from inactivating. Basically, the reset button is totally destroyed. Finally, in step 3, because the cells stay persistently depolarized, they just fire uncontrollably. The body's response is then dominated by the vagus nerve, the great parasympathetic nerve to your heart, which starts overfiring and completely slams the brakes on your heart rate through what are called M2 muscarinic receptors.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the mechanics of it. Think of that blocked sodium channel exactly like a jammed electrical switch. The switch is flipped on to let the current, or in this case, the cellular sodium, pour in. But the grayanotoxin jams that switch so it physically can't be turned off. So sodium just keeps pouring in persistently. Your nerves and muscle cells get locked in the state of uncontrollable firing. It is literally an electrical overload for your entire nervous system. And because of that jammed switch and the resulting vagus nerve overactivation, the medical consequences are, well, they're stark. In the largest pooled review of 900 mad honey poisoning cases, a massive 88% of patients suffered from profound bradycardia. That means a dangerously slow heart rate. We're not talking about a subtle shift here. It is a profound, life-threatening slowing of the heart's natural rhythm.
And right alongside that clinical reality, 76% of those exact same patients experienced dangerous hypotension. Their blood pressure essentially just dropped through the floor. When you combine a heart that is barely beating with blood pressure that's absolutely crashing, you've got a perfect recipe for fainting, heart rhythm disturbances, and severe medical emergencies. So the real takeaway here is that mad honey is steeply dose-dependent. At a low dose, people usually report dizziness, tingling, numbness, often right around the mouth, and a sort of mild euphoric buzz. But if you cross that invisible threshold into a high dose, the picture turns strictly medical, real fast. We're talking vomiting, excessive salivation, extreme bradycardia, fainting, and even heart block. Frank hallucinations? They're actually relatively uncommon. It's crystal clear that mad honey is fundamentally a dose-dependent cardiotoxin and deliriant, definitely not a serotonergic psychedelic. Which brings us perfectly to some ancient history where this exact biology was used on the battlefield. Let's step out of the modern emergency room for a second and travel back in time. These exact cardiotoxic effects we just talked about, they weren't just discovered recently. They were heavily documented in ancient, high-stakes tactical warfare. In fact, mad honey has one of the best documented histories of any intoxicant purely because it kept showing up in war zones. In 401 BC, Xenophon's Greek soldiers totally collapsed after eating it. Jump ahead 3 centuries to the 1st century BC,
and allies of King Mithridates, known as the Heptacalmethus, deliberately left mad honeycombs along a path as a booby trap for Pompey's Roman legions. The Romans eagerly ate the honey, collapsed from that massive blood pressure drop we just discussed, and were easily ambushed. And remarkably, despite knowing all this crazy history, this exact same traditional use continues right up to today.
To really bring that 401 BC event vividly to life, just listen to this quote from Xenophon's Anabasis. As his 10,000 Greek soldiers retreated along the Black Sea coast, they foolishly raided some local hives. Xenophon wrote, "Those who ate a little seemed drunk. Those who ate a lot behaved like madmen, or lay as if dead." It's honestly a perfect, ancient clinical description of dose-dependent grayanotoxin poisoning. Now, they had no fatalities and luckily recovered in a few days, but it completely incapacitated an entire battle-hardened army.
So, how do they actually get this stuff? Let's look at the incredible process of harvesting the cliff hives.
And this brilliantly illustrates the sheer lengths people will go to for this honey. There are basically two distinct worlds where this perilous tradition is kept alive today. On one side, we have the Black Sea region of Turkey, the absolute heart of deli ball production, where it's harvested from dense thickets of rhododendron ponticum and luteum. On the totally other side of the world, we have Nepal, high up in the Himalayas. Here, the enormous Himalayan giant honeybee, Apis laboriosa, builds its nests on sheer, vertical cliff faces. The Gurung honey hunters literally climb hundreds of feet up handmade rope ladders, fighting through thick smoke and swarming giant bees, just to cut these combs down. It is a breathtaking and genuinely dangerous ancient ritual.
But that begs the question, what is the real danger of this practice today?
So, knowing all the history and the hardcore pharmacology behind it, it brings us to a vital question. Why on earth do people in the modern world still willingly ingest a known cardiovascular poison? Well, it mostly comes down to folk medicine and modern marketing. Despite all its dangers, mad honey is widely used as an unproven treatment for high blood pressure, diabetes, and stomach complaints. But even more significantly, it's heavily marketed right now as an aphrodisiac and sexual enhancer. Because of this, the vast majority of documented victims today are middle-aged men who simply took too much while chasing that specific effect. None of these medicinal claims are actually proven, but what is proven is that chasing them can easily land you in the emergency room, especially if you have an existing heart condition.
And this brings up an absolutely crucial point. Natural absolutely does not mean safe. The greatest danger of mad honey isn't necessarily its baseline potency, it's the sheer wild unpredictability. You see, grayanotoxin levels swing wildly depending on the exact rhododendron species, the season, the elevation, and even from one little section of a honeycomb to another. Raw single hive honey is far, far stronger than blended commercial batches. There's simply no way for a consumer to know how much toxin they're actually ingesting. Every single spoonful is a total gamble.
Fortunately, if that gamble goes wrong, mad honey poisoning is actually very treatable. The effects are self-limiting and usually clear up entirely within about 24 hours. So cardiac monitoring is the baseline standard of care. But for severe cases, doctors rely on a drug called atropine. Remember how we said the grayanotoxins causes the vagus nerve to overactivate through muscarinic receptors? Well, atropine perfectly blocks those exact receptors, rapidly reversing that dangerously slow heart rate. Combined with a course of intravenous fluids to restore their blood pressure, patients usually make a full recovery. The real trick here is that emergency room doctors have to actually recognize this obscure, sudden bradycardia for exactly what it is.
Which brings us to the end of our explainer. Mad honey is just this incredible marvel of natural chemistry. A plant toxin ferried by tiny bees into something that looks completely innocent, yet reaches straight into the electrical machinery of your heart. It has incapacitated ancient armies and is still pulled from sheer Himalayan cliffs today. So I'll leave you with this question to ponder. In a modern world of highly controlled medicines and precise dosages, how much respect do we owe the unpredictable, totally untamed chemistry of the wild? Thank you for exploring this fascinating intersection of botany, pharmacology, and history with me today.